Hi, and welcome to another episode of Okay, so I've got something to say. Today's going to be just a fun little conversation with Reed and I, kind of talking about life and how we do things when it's hard. And so I kind of can relate to just getting the podcast started, but it makes me think about you and what you've had to do in this last year, 15 months kind of thing, moving forward in something when we don't really know. We don't know the outcome. We don't know how long the time frame is going to be on something, but we move forward because we know we're supposed to, because God's told us to do it. And it's hard. Like what you do when it's hard, but how you still keep going. And so for me, all I can think of, the hardest thing, aside from being the wife sitting next to the bed with the husband and all that stuff of your episode, and aside from other things like earlier in my lifetime that I've gone through, like getting myself set up for a podcast has been a challenge. And not because podcasts are difficult to make, it's been more of the challenge of overcoming my own thoughts, feelings, fears, and moving in that. And so I was thinking about you. In one of the things I've said to so many people is, you got up every day because I told you something of while you were sleeping, and you've gotten up every day since coming home from the hospital, and even while you were in the hospital, and you've just done all of the things. That's been my observance from the outside, right? Like you've just gotten up and you've done all the things. And I've tried to remember that as I've gotten ready and focused on how to do this podcast, but I've really dragged my feet. Like, thank God you didn't drag your feet the same way I did. And is this really like what I'm supposed to do? Because this is hard. Like getting over myself, getting over my fears, getting over the unknown, having to do research on subject that I'm not even familiar with, right? Like it's a lot of hard stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is fear. If I'm being totally honest and I break it down the most, it's fear. And so moving in fear, and how do you do that? And so I've just really, luckily, I have you. I also have a good group of girlfriends that I've been able to just be super real, super vulnerable with, and be like, this is like hard, and why it's hard, what makes it hard. And one of the things is that daily, and sometimes even multiple times in a day, God has just been really gracious in reminding me and showing me and getting me into that next moment, because sometimes that's all it is a moment by moment thing. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about is, how do we move forward with something when it's really hard?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're probably, aside from my own just knowing how my mind works, you're a really good example for me of moving forward when something is really hard. So for a lot of people, they don't know. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't know. When you were released from the hospital, your right arm, your dominant arm and hand, you had severe nerve damage done in, so you didn't have use of it.
On leg.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know, not to diminish your leg, but you're able to walk no matter. Like you've always been able to walk. Yes, you walk differently, but your right arm and hand, like you haven't been able to, in the beginning, brush your teeth, comb your hair, wash your body.
In the beginning, it was all of it. It was definitely the leg. Remember, and for me, it was more of a memory than probably you. Even though you were there with me, just going through it personally, knowing what it took for me to raise that leg up, and every single time, you don't even think about it when you're walking. How many times your right foot hit the ground?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the military we call it the cadence, right?
Mm-hmm.
That beat, that natural beat
of stepping,
your pace,
right?
But all of a sudden, I'm throwing in. There's a big mental process there, because I'm literally in my mind remembering I got to pick my foot up. I got to try to raise those toes as much as possible, because if not, I had the toe drop where it would drag, and all of a sudden, in my mind, I'm stepping.
Right.
But in reality, I'm about to hit the ground.
Right.
So.
Well, and you also had, so yeah, you're walking definitely, but your everyday doing. You're texting, you're typing, you're brushing your teeth, you're combing your hair, you're feeding yourself, trying to write your name, that you had to overcome. I think that's the word I want to highlight, actually, is overcome. And so for this conversation, I want it to be more like, just how do we do that? How do we, because it's a choice, right? There has to be a conscious decision that you make that says, I'm going forward no matter. Even though I don't know how long this is going to take, even though I don't know when and if, even though this sucks and it hurts and there's challenges, embarrassment maybe there's guilt or shame, whatever it is that's the hang up in the moving forward. How do you do that? So if somebody was talking to you, how would you encourage them? So obviously we lead by example, right? So how would you encourage them in this is hard, but you're going to do it anyways?
A lot of it's looking inward. Mm-hmm. For me, with my background, so a lot of it went back to my military time and just looking at, okay, what's my goal?
Yeah.
And then how do I visualize me accomplishing this goal? Mm-hmm. And then what does success look like? How close can I actually get to that? Because going through physical therapy, in the beginning, just trying to raise my arm, mm-hmm. in my mind, I'm raising it. It's all the way up, right? I've won. It's up. And in reality, I'm actually getting it up a couple inches, and all of a sudden my hand's flopping and slapping myself in the face.
Right.
It doesn't matter what actually happened because I've got it raised high.
Right. You just gave me a really rad visual, actually, in just saying that, because that's kind of how our relationship is with Christ, actually. In the ability to see something. So even in just how we accept mercy and grace and forgiveness, we have to see something. In our mind, we see, a lot of people will talk about visually seeing him on the cross. Like he took on all of our sin and shame and died that sinner's death on a cross, even though he was sinless. And you have to visually see something in your mind to actually achieve it in the physical. And for you, I think of how many times you went to physical therapy where in your mind, you saw yourself raising your arm and you weren't there, but in the physical, you weren't there. But how many times did you repeat that over and over, those steps, those therapies, before you really were raising your arm, right? And it's kind of the same thing, that in order for us to walk in that grace and forgiveness and mercy that Christ offers, how we have to really just, it's kind of fake it till you make it, almost, in a sense.
Yep. It's one of those, you keep doing it.
No matter
what.
And how do you do that when you wake up every day and you still don't have use? Like, how do you get to that? This is going to be I know I'm going to have healing here. How do you do that?
It's definitely a personal choice.
Yeah.
For me, it's a lot of my background, how I was raised, what I went through, what I learned in the military. And for me, everything skips right back to my spiritual beliefs. Mm-hmm. My God. Mm-hmm. At no point did I ever feel like I was alone. Mm-hmm. I guess, and I think you actually put it the word best. He didn't bring me back to leave me stranded.
Right.
So for me, the biggest thing was just visualizing that outcome.
So visualizing success.
What God was going to bring me to. Mm-hmm. Not focusing on where I was at that moment, but where God was going to take me to. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we get caught up in the here and now.
Right.
Because we've lost sight of what God has in store
in our
for us.
future. Yeah.
And He'll do everything He can to lead us there.
Mm-hmm. But He doesn't drag us. We got to go.
It's just like the old saying, you can lead a horse to water.
Right, but you can't make him drink, so you have to choose to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So throughout the whole situation, my choice was what God promised.
Mm-hmm.
Getting there, putting the work in, all that effort, it was hard work, don't get me wrong, but it was simple for me because I had enough belief in God.
Faith.
Yeah, it was definitely faith. It was just knowing, and part of it was hearing what I don't know how many times we talked. I was laying in that bed and you just kept telling me, you helped drive it home in the very beginning.
While you were still in the hospital?
When I was still in the hospital. You told me you prayed with me every day, multiple times. We did worship together. And you told me, God saved me for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the end.
Right.
This is not the outcome. This is just a story to the outcome.
Right.
So this is our in-between. You coined the phrase. It was, I don't know how many times I've heard it, but that's what it was.
It's in between.
So this is where we're working.
Right.
We're putting in all the effort to get to this goal.
Right.
So it was always just visualize the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And you know it as well as I do. I've got the Rocky theme song playing in my head because that's where I'm going to be
with arms
my
raised.
hands raised.
But you also get to that already. Now, granted, you have a lot of healing, which in another episode we'll discuss. You're not completely healed and restored fully with your arm and your leg, and all of that kind of stuff. But you already get to be in worship with your hands raised, and I think that is something that's pretty visual as well. Like if that's been your goal visually in your head, you were seeing your hand raised, but in reality your hand was only going up, or your arm was only lifting inches and your hand was slapping yourself in your face. But your goal has always been to get to that place of where you had that movement and you could control it that way. And I think it's so rad that you're able to worship. And so you are able, and you've been able to gradually keep getting more and more and more, where it used to just be just a little bit of the movement of the hand, or maybe not even that hand in the beginning. And then now you actually can lift your hands in worship. You can raise your arms up in worship. And I think that's pretty cool. That if that's your visual goal, is to be able to lift your hands in worship. You know what I mean? Like, yes, obviously all the other things come into play as well. Being able to comb your hair, brush your teeth, write your name, pull, the trigger on your pistol, or turn the key in your truck to start it. All of those are also goals, but to be able to lift your hands in worship is pretty impressive as well. And it's so funny how our being different humans and different sexes, it's funny how you return to center, so to speak, by the training that you had while you were military. That's your return to center. Like when you start getting out of control, so to speak, with overwhelming thoughts, feelings, emotions. Okay, simplify it, go back to how I was trained. And for me, my center is worship music, because I can spin out really easy with overwhelming thoughts, feelings, emotions of, especially in my fear or anxiety of this is not going to turn out well. Like, who is going to listen to some girl talk, right? Or how many times have you heard me say, what do I even have to talk about? Is there even going to be content for a podcast?
Well, that's your almost your approach to things. That's, you question it a lot at. Whereas mine is, hey, y'all watch this.
Right.
Yeah.
But also
what's really going to happen? I'm not going to fail, because no matter what I do, I'm winning.
Right. Because you're alive. Right.
Yep.
And for me, because I have overcome so much, I said again, I don't want to ever minimize anything I've gone through, because I am a survivor. But because I live with such a mentality of surviving all of it, not victim, like it's just my life. it's my story. It's things that I've gone through. Yes, I can be very emotional. Some of it's very hard. There are lingering effects to a lot of it. But at the same time, like, I just live life. But when you have to slow it down and break it up into, now we're going to take your life and put it into podcast episodes. Holy cow, that got hard. Like, that got hard fast. And part of it is because, multiple times in my life, there's always been this whole thing of not enough or too much. That's who I am. And so then you have to be like, well, okay, what do I have to talk about that actually matters? And how do I say this? And people really don't know what to do with me sometimes because of the way I talk. Because a lot of people don't know, obviously, when they first encounter, they don't know that I'm one of 7 kids. They don't know that most of my family is deaf, like in my immediate home, how I was raised, and that kind of stuff. So I talk loud. I'm animated. I get excited very easy about everything. I can get just as excited about our little tree growing in the backyard finally as I do about an epic vacation, huh? Like, I'm just out there all the time. Like, that's me. And so when you have to slow yourself down and you start breaking it up into things about your life, you go, dang, this is hard. And I have dragged this out since October. Oh. We had it confirmed, though, multiple different times and ways in 2019 that, yes, this is definitely something that God called me to. This is something he's had actually placed on my life for a long time. And here we are, end of May, going into the beginning of June, and I've dragged this out to where I'm just getting started because I have found every reason to procrastinate. And on top of all of this, I've allowed myself to be like, well, I'm busy and there's this going on and I've got to research this and I've got to research that. And then God goes, I got something for you. Here's a coronavirus. Everybody's at stay-at-home orders. You got nothing but time now, Connie. That's been a hard one for me where I was like, crap, there's no excuses. I have no excuses. So how do I face me and how do I face this? And again, like I said, I'm so grateful that I have you. And I'm also so grateful that I have the group of friends that I have where I can just be stupid and be like, no, I can't do this and this is why. And they're like, are you serious? And then God so graciously reminding me, because what a lot of people don't know is there has actually been lots of times in my life where I have spoken, whether it be at women's retreats and news and press conferences, which will be further episodes on why that happened. But this isn't something where I woke up one day and just thought, oh, this would be a fun idea. This has literally been a calling on my life for a while. And I've probably been the one to ignore it more than it's been that God hasn't finished nurturing stuff in me and building stuff up. But I think, again, being the wife that sits next to the husband and watches you get up every day and go through all that you go through without question, without fail, without surrender. You've never said, I'm not going to get better. I'm never going to be able to do this. You've not ever done that. You have talked about what your struggles are, how hard something is, lack of feeling, lack of movement, things like that. But you have always gotten up and done everything you were supposed to do. And so how could I sit back and be like, I'm too chicken, cannot do this, when I live with a man who has the ability to do that? And then also, how could I look at myself in the mirror and be like, I got up every day and went to that hospital and faced the unknown. How could I be afraid of a podcast, right? It's just talking, and this is what I do. I talk. And so I think that's one of the greatest examples, though, that you could give people is, this is hard. And how do you move through this is hard?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to walk like, it's like trudging through mud or quicksand. So the steps are super slow and painful. But I think the greatest thing is that you just keep moving forward. You don't go backwards and you don't stand still. You just keep moving forward. And I think it was a conversation we were having driving home from small group one night where you were talking about knowing that God's obviously brought you here for a reason and that he's got something on your life that he wants you to do. But how do you know what it is that he wants you to do with this? And I said to you, you just move forward with what you think it is, because the best way to get directions for turning is to be in motion. But you you can't turn right if you're sitting still. You can't turn left if you're sitting still, right? So you have to be going. And when you walk in obedience, I think God then directs you with, okay, this is the way. So what do you think God's called you to? What do you think God's using you for? And I'm not going to lie. I've always thought that there's been, first of all, I believe you're supposed to speak just to people in the church, whatever the church looks like, physical building or in the world, talking through the podcast, just being the example at workplaces and friendships and stuff. Because you have such a good personality too. I just feel like you're able to encourage people. People are drawn to you.
Yeah, and I think part of it is when I can get a little bit off the serious note, because what I do run into is the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can get into that comfortable set, then my personality comes out, and I like to joke.
Yeah, you're a joker.
I mean, listen,
you got a good poker face too, though. So not everybody can always tell when you're joking. So that's the good thing about this being behind a microphone or a screen.
But yeah. So if I get past the some of the seriousness of situations, so I can allow myself to get comfortable, that's where I feel like there's breakthrough.
Yeah, I think your emotion though is also pretty needed. It makes you more believable. It also softens you because you're a big guy. You're a big, burly, boisterous guy. And especially because you have such a good poker face, you can be intimidating. Not that people are seeing you because they're only hearing you right now, but in life, in real life, when people see you, you can be intimidating, especially because of your military background, because you're like hard. You're hard, really, for real. And so when people get to see that softer side of you, also, though, it makes you way more relatable. But also, I think that also speaks to the graciousness of God in somebody who has always been so hard and stoic and, like stone, to be able to see you soft and emotional and all that stuff. Also just speaks vulnerable. To vulnerable. Yeah. That it just speaks to something with you or with everybody else. Because I know for me, when you talk and you're just telling a story, sometimes I can feel a little disconnected from you while you're talking, even though I lived it with you. And the moment I see emotion in you, then I'm there. You pull me in. And I think a lot of people are that way as well. But I think I want to ask you, what has been your hardest struggles? So what have you seen has been the most difficult thing, and how have you moved past it and through it?
I think it's just looking at it in today's day and time. Nobody has patience. Nobody wants to wait for anything.
Right. We're in that microwave world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why boil water on the stove when I can just nuke it?
Right.
So for me, just if I'm not moving forward, then I'm sitting still.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I don't do well with.
No, you're not. You're one of those, you'll shake your foot like crazy just so that you're moving.
Yeah.
That's why you and your little buddy are besties, because you both are the same way in that regard.
So for me, one of the struggles was learning to accept my situation.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that this is not the final product. This is not where God's going to leave me.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to accept the limitations and build off of them. Know that today, the fact that I can't pick up this block off the table, or today I was able to scoop beans up in a cup, but I couldn't rotate my wrist around to pour them out.
Mm-hmm.
Or as the physical therapist will laugh about, I spill the whole cup of beans on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
It's just knowing that where I'm at is not where I'm going to be.
Right.
That was probably the hardest for me to accept, and realizing that until I accepted it, I didn't have a breakthrough.
That's powerful. Oh, that's the same as what I've gone through with this. I have literally battled this with God. And it wasn't until I came to a place of acceptance as well, surrender, and going, okay, surrender. This is what you're going to do, aren't you? Like, I can be obedient and follow what you're saying and where you're leading, or I can keep resisting it. And the more I resist it, the more tore up I was, the more in knots I was, and the more that he would just so blaringly put things in my face. And I can remember saying to him last week, how much longer are you going to entertain my insecurities by reminding me how much? Because as a human, I'd be like, you know what? Peace out, bro. I'm over it. Like, you're either going to do it or not, but I am done coddling you on this. But thank God we serve a Lord who's just like so much more gracious than us as humans. Because I totally would have been like, nope, done with you. And he's just kept on. So clearly he's got something here that he wants to do with it. Just the same as you. I think, it was said on the daily devotional the other day, where it was a miracle, one of the greatest miracles that pastor had ever seen was what happened with you. And I think that's one of the things that we joke about, but it's also one of the things that we just sit in awe of, is that God chose to do what he did in this situation. And it wasn't just one of those where, back to the story with what we were listening to the other day, that one sermon we were listening to, where it was Mary prayed for Lazarus's healing.
Mary, come here.
Mary, come here. Yeah. And where God was like, yeah, I could give you a healing and that would make you happy. But that would only impact her life and her sister and Lazarus's life, right? Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Yeah, he's all better. Or if he didn't go and move right then like she wanted, and he let it play out, instead he could perform a miracle. And how did that impact? How much more did that impact, right? And I think a lot of us get stuck in that, where we're praying and we want something in the immediate right now. And if it doesn't turn out right now, and it doesn't turn out the way we expected, then we think that God's not listening or he's not doing. And that's why I like to change, where I say change your perspective. So instead of saying wait in the waiting, we say in the in-between. Because in the in-between, your brain knows that something's happening in the in-between, right? God's up to something, we're up to something, something's happening in the in-between. But if you say waiting, well, waiting is like crickets.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening in the waiting. You're just waiting.
You don't deal well.
No.
At all.
But if you say the in-between, then it's like your body, your brain does not want to rebel, and it acts in the obedience of almost an excitement of, okay, God, what are you doing in the in-between? Like, there's an anticipation of something good in the in-between. But the waiting sucks. The waiting is where everybody breaks their diet pact, right? The waiting is where they quit doing that workout because they did it for 2 days in a row and they're not 20 pounds lighter. The waiting is like, you just started your job and you were told that after a 6-month review, you possibly could get a raise. And so you're on day 20 and you're like, where's the raise?
Yep.
Am I going to quit? I don't like this job. I'm not treated. You know what I mean? The waiting sucks. And in the waiting, we self-sabotage and we say God's not in the waiting, but in the in-between, we just have this ability to hang on different. And so it's a perspective. That's what I tell people all the time. Do a perspective shift. You got to change it, because our body, our brain naturally wants to rebel against certain terms, certain things. But if you do a perspective shift, it allows you, it sustains you, but it allows you to just stand longer in that place and wait expectantly in the in-between versus I'm over it. I'm not supermodel skinny yet, so.
Well, I think, and at least with my situation, the in-between is a lot more bearable if you've got a good visual of the outcome. If you can visualize the outcome, if you can visualize the victory. So if you have a good visualization of what that goal is.
Yeah.
That mental picture
yeah.
that you can refer to. So, you're lifting those weights to strengthen that arm up. You're visualizing, episode 4 of your podcast so you can get started on episode 1.
Right.
The whole thing is you've got to get started. You know that. That's your in between. But how do you get to episode 100? You've got to do the in between.
Right. But I also think that on top of all of that, especially for people like us where our relationship with Christ is so important and it's such a big deal, is not only do we have to be able to see those end goals, we also have to visualize who is with us in the in-between. And I know for me, definitely with a lot of us, we get so caught up in life. And I think that's actually kind of what's so great about the coronavirus and the stay-at-home orders and all that. People had to slow down. They had to stop. And I think that was one of the raddest things for me, even though it was so terrifying while you were in the hospital, was that it made my body and brain have to slow down of all of the life events to just come to the one thing, which was you and your survival. And it allowed me to focus time and attention and emotion constantly on my relationship. Versus a lot of us, we have this relationship with Christ. We'll get up during the day. We'll have our prayer and reading time and worship time while we're driving. And then we go about our day. We're at work. So now we are a working person. And God, we don't really bring him into it so much. We have our life at work. We have all of our things. And then we're decompressing on our drive home because now we got to go home and be the spouse and the parent. And there's the homework and the dinner and the getting ready of, the evening routines and all that other stuff. And we tend to forget that God's with us in all of it, in all things. And that was the raddest part for me while you were in the hospital, even though it was so difficult, was that in the morning when I woke, I knew he was with me. And in the time that I was getting ready, and part of it was because of the fear, the unknown was so strong in me. I knew that the only way that I was getting from rising out of the bed to getting my coffee was I had to do it holding on to him. And then going from getting the coffee into the bathroom to get ready and dressed was holding on to him. And then the drive, that hour and 20-minute rush hour drive, I hated and did for 34 days. And how terrifying it was that even though I didn't have phone calls happen through the night, there was that fear of what was I going to face when I walked into the hospital to see you? Where were you? How were you? Because everything was always so unknown and ever changing. And it was just holding on to him. So in all the things that I did all day long, I had to cling to him. And that was the raddest part for me, was making him more current to all of my life versus this is just my Jesus time. He's in all things. Scripture even says that. He is in all things. And so I think for us also, in your time of visualizing your goal and what you needed, it was also realizing you weren't alone in it. And it's been the same with me, even though I've definitely been more stubborn. It was having to overcome myself, pull my own head out of my butt, so to speak, on doing this podcast, knowing that God called me to it, but knowing he called me to this. He's not going to bring me here to humiliate me. He's got a plan, which means he's going to direct traffic to it, right? Yes, I know that there are people in this world that are mean, so not all things are going to be great from it. Not everybody's going to receive it the way that I hope they do or whatever, and I understand that. I know I'm opening us up and I'm making myself very vulnerable for criticism and judgment and stuff like that. But I have to pull past all of that and say, if he's bringing me here, he's got a plan. And so I've got to trust him more than I trust or don't trust myself or don't trust the people that are going to listen, right? I got to trust God. And I think that's the difference with you and I versus maybe some other people that don't have the relationship yet with Christ that we have, or maybe they haven't gone through that thing. I know that your heart attack shook us, right? It shook us. And so that makes it easier for us to cling to him because our world was rocked. He rocked our world. But I love that he did it also. Like, there's a lot of things where people could look at their life. We could look at what we've gone through in the last 15, 16 months and be, woe is me, right? Like, we really could. And it was hard. I will never deny that it has been hard. But I feel so grateful that this is what we've walked through because it changed us. And I love having a better relationship, a better understanding with our Savior, and having that common bond with my spouse even. Like, we always knew we had a relationship with Christ. We always knew we loved the Lord, each individually and separately prior to your stunt. But now it's bonded us in a different way as a couple in what we're doing and going forward, right? And I don't know, I'm really like, no, I wouldn't raise my hand and sign up for it and be like, hey, let's do this, God. Like, let's do this again. I wouldn't choose it necessarily.
No.
But I don't regret it. I don't wish it hadn't happened. I don't have all of those negative spins that a lot of people sometimes will do on the woe is me. I feel so lucky. I feel lucky that this is where we're at and that we get to tell this story. Obviously, yes, I'm even more lucky because you're alive. And so there's a gratefulness in that as well. But I don't know. I wouldn't change our thing. But I think it also gives us the ability to stand in the midst of the hard times or in the fire and be able to look somebody square in the eye and know that we know that we know we're telling somebody something that's true, right?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking, absolutely, yes, there is an easier way that we could have got to this point. But unfortunately, I know me. And I do not always take things at face value. I look for the why behind it. Why is someone trying to give me this? What's wrong with it? What kind of injury did they end up with? It's like we could have got here a lot easier. There was definitely an easy route. I don't know why God chose the difficult, extremely difficult. I don't even, when you're skiing, you've got the different slopes.
Right, yes.
What's past black?
Diamond or something, right? Or no? Is that the hardest? I don't know. I've only skied ever once, but I know what you're talking about.
I've only gone once, so I can't speak as much. But whatever that is, I don't know why it had to be that one.
Right.
So,
But at the same time, we survived.
Well, and that's just it. I think the whole purpose in it was to be able to tell the story of how we got here.
Right. People go through stuff and it's like all consuming, right? And they think, I'm not going to get through this. This is going to take me out. And, part of it is not necessarily that God caused this by any means, but he let us go through it for a reason. And it's that whole reason of when Christ is in us, the abilities, the powers that we have built in us, but also the whole thing of what he's capable of, what he does. There's a lot of people, I probably was at fault of thinking it as well. Like, miracles only happen in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. It was just stories told.
Yeah, like
in Sunday school,
Yeah, like faith was faith. I had that whole ability to be like, as long as there's breath in my body, then God's not done with me yet. Mm-hmm. But because of my past experiences,
you're a little jaded on it.
Jaded, yes, but it's kind of the same thing as because my first child was a girl. I didn't know when I found out that I was pregnant with my second child that it was a boy. I did not know how to comprehend what it was going to be like to raise a boy because I only had the ability to understand a girl. And so because of my past experiences, I've never had somebody's life saved and raised from the dead, essentially. I didn't think that that was what was going to be given. It was hard. I wanted it. I wanted it, obviously, with everything in my being. I wanted you to survive. I didn't think you were going to in the beginning because that's just not what I ever had before. I always had a no. I remember saying that to the pastors that came up to pray with me on day number 2, the second day in the hospital. He's only ever given me a no. How am I going to get a yes? I didn't know how to surrender you in belief of a yes and know that even if it was a no, that I would still survive. Like, there was just so much I had to process and walk through. But I think that that's what brings God so current versus the Bible story of God that makes him so current in our here and now, is that whole idea of seeing it and being able to say that you could fully surrender something and letting him move and work in something. And I think that's going to be the rad stuff that comes in other episodes with you when we actually break down the nitty gritty of what you did, your little stunt, what you did and what happened in it. I think that's going to be pretty cool. But the premise of this conversation is how we look at something and go, this is hard.
This is hard.
This is
and
hard.
How do we begin?
How do you do that? How do you move forward? How do you step? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think that for me, looking at what I've gone through with just the torment I've done to myself over the podcast, I'm so grateful that I had you. You've never, ever once, the moment that I came running out of the bathroom and said, I'm going to start a podcast, you never looked at me like I was crazy. You never said, what woman are you talking about? Nothing. You've always just been like, okay, so how do we get you there? Like, so you've done the homework and research right along with me, or deeper at times than me. You did the homework and research on my microphone and like all of the little things, because my brain doesn't work that way. And you've just been a constant support. And I know that for me this is really hard, because I have you to help walk me through stuff. I'm able to get to here. You want a pony? Thank you.
We'll talk about that conversation.
but for you at Home Depot. But for you, what would you say as far as this is hard? But how do you take the steps? What do you do besides your visualization of your end goal and all that kind of stuff? Like, what is your practical ways? Like, if somebody was looking at you right now, besides your visualizing your end goal, like, what does everybody need? Like, I think we all need somebody in our corner, right?
Right. I looked at it like, okay, what does she want? I looked at your end goal. I want to be successful, or we're not even going to go to what does that mean, but how do we get you there? What all is it going to take? What's the little things that I might be able to help you with? Because for you, giving you those building blocks allows you to keep climbing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was just a supportive role to get you going. I'm behind you on the bike, just pushing.
Mm-hmm. I would say...
So I just looked at other podcasts.
Yeah.
I looked at other people that went through this process, what they're using, the research that I did on it. Customer reviews, seeing what everybody else says about certain pieces of equipment or
right.
different programs, and doing all of that because I did not see you wanting to do that part of it. So I wanted
this is what's coming into my brain right now as we're talking about all of this, because it's been in process for so long and you forget about step number 1 where we started, which was what? Podcast, and like just talking to a few people and running it by them, like, what do you think? And having people immediately be like, oh my gosh, yes, you should speak, you should talk to people, a podcast perfect for you. And being like, oh crap, okay, so nobody's talking sense into me. Nobody's saying, oh, Connie, really, like, you're too old for that, or you might want to reconsider.
Yeah, just getting a census.
Yeah.
For the temperature.
Yeah. But I think in us even getting this established, even though most of it's going to be me conversing with people, it still affects your life, right? Because I'm telling your private stories too on here. I'm taking away time from you to be able to do this, and that kind of stuff. But it's always, well, just playing that supportive role to your partner, but also having that ability to hear somebody look at you and say, this is hard, and moving them through it. So sometimes we have to help guide them by encouragement and excitement. And sometimes we have to just speak truth. And so that's going to happen, right? We're going to speak truth on here. And sometimes you have to freaking shove them. And I feel like that's what God's done with me a couple times, just a swift kick in the butt, go. I said, come here. That whole Mary thing. Yeah, back to that conversation. Wow, that's interesting. So anyways, I'm excited about it. What do you think? Are you excited, or you're just kind of like...
For me,
yeah,
and everybody's different on their approaches and everything. For me, this has been a slow, drawn out process. But that's just me.
Yeah.
I'm totally different. I'm that. Hey, y'all, watch this.
Right, you're right
My
now.
favorite
Well,
phrase.
so am I, depending on what it is.
But the planning.
The scarier it is, the harder it is for me to move.
I'm one of those.
I'm going to analyze it.
I like to jump out.
Right.
Figure out what my mistakes were. Back up 2 steps and jump again. So it's
I'm
my
not made that
mentality.
way.
Fake it till you make it. I don't know who told me that, or going back. Oh God, back. I started to say a year, but we're not doing that. Going back to the beginning of my military career, where the whole thing is keep on moving.
Mm-hmm.
You might have to circle back around to fix something, but just keep on moving.
Right.
You never want to stand stagnant.
Right.
Because if you do, you're getting run
Ooh, I
over.
just had a visual all of a sudden with that stand still and stagnant. Like, what happens in standing water? It gets moldy and slimy and gross, and bugs are drawn to it. And you can get sores and infestations and stuff like that.
Yep.
I just had that visual. And so that's what we do, though, also in our life. Like, with hurts that we don't want to get over, or with doing something that's hard, or, a change that needs to happen kind of stuff, anything that's difficult. If we just sit in it, if we just sit in our own yuck and wallow in it, it gets worse. Things fester. But if you move...
Remember
Yeah.
our epic road trip.
I love that trip.
Remember when we stopped on the Parkway, the Blue Ridge Parkway?
Yeah.
Remember that stream, how the water
Yes,
was
how it
just
sounded.
so beautiful. The sound of it running through there.
Mm-hmm.
It was just perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't sitting still at all.
Right. Well, I thank you for doing this with me and having the conversation. There's more upcoming conversations you have to have with me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just keep chit-chatting.
Yeah. I have a feeling you'll be my favorite guest on here. For myself, but for other people.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I'm very likable.
you're a very likable guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank y'all for joining us again. We look forward to having another conversation again soon.